The crossroads of fate bustled with the chaotic energy of 1,000 lives intersecting. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, whipped up by the restless shuffling of camels and the hurried footsteps of merchants. The air crackled with the cries of vendors hawking their wares, spices, silks, and stories of faraway lands. But beneath the vibrant surface, a darker trade unfolded. At the heart of the market square, auctioneer Hafiz, a man with eyes as cold as desert stones, surveyed his latest acquisitions. He ran a hand over his oiled beard, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Refugees, driven from their homes by drought and despair, stood huddled together, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Hafiz saw not people but commodities, each one a potential profit. He'd bought them cheaply, planning to sell them for a hefty sum, pocketing the difference. Among them stood Basira, a young woman of 24 years. Unlike the others, her fear was masked by a quiet dignity. Layers of worn cloth concealed her figure, a heavy veil hiding her face. She stood apart, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, as if searching for a flicker of hope in the dust-filled sky. She did not weep or plead like the others. She simply waited, her heart a silent drum against her ribs. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the square into a furnace. The cries of the auctioneer echoed across the crowded space, each word a hammer blow against the hopes of the desperate. Then a hush fell over the crowd. A caravan led by a tall, imposing figure entered the square. It was Sheikh Jalil, a wealthy caravan leader, known for his shrewd bargaining and unwavering resolve. He had traveled far, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharp and observant. He dismounted his camel with a sigh, weariness clinging to him like the desert dust. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on the huddled figures before Hafiz. He wasn't here to buy slaves, not usually, but something in the air, a subtle shift in the market's rhythm, held his attention. 2 gold coins. Hafiz, eager to unload his human cargo, gestured towards Basira. "Here we have a strong young woman, fit for any task," he announced, his voice dripping with false enthusiasm. He tugged at the edge of her veil, attempting to reveal her face. Basira flinched, pulling away from his touch. The merchants in the crowd showed little interest. They were looking for strong men to work the fields or skilled artisans. A quiet woman, shrouded in mystery, held no appeal. Hafiz grew frustrated. He had hoped to sell her for a decent price, but no one was biting. He lowered his voice, his tone laced with disdain. 2 gold coins, 2 gold coins for this woman, he practically spat. The crowd murmured. 2 gold coins was a paltry sum, barely enough to buy a good camel. It was clear that Hafiz just wanted to be rid of her. Sheikh Jalil, standing at the edge of the crowd, observed the scene with a discerning eye. He had been about to turn away, his business elsewhere, when something about Basira caught his attention. It wasn't her appearance, hidden as it was beneath layers of cloth. It was her demeanor. Her quiet dignity, her refusal to crumble under Hafiz's cruel gaze, sparked a flicker of curiosity within him. He stepped forward, his shadow falling across the auctioneer's platform. 2 gold coins, you say? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Hafiz's eyes lit up. A buyer at last. "Yes, Sheikh Jalil," he said, bowing slightly. "A bargain, wouldn't you agree?" Jalil did not respond. He looked at Basira, his gaze penetrating the veil that separated them. He saw not a slave, but a person, a quiet strength radiating from her despite her circumstances. He reached into his pouch and withdrew 2 gold coins, placing them in Hafiz's outstretched hand. "She is mine," he said simply. The transaction was swift, almost unceremonious. Hafiz, relieved to be rid of her, quickly moved on to his next victim. Basira, still veiled, was led towards Jalil. As she approached, she stumbled slightly. Jalil reached out, his hand brushing against hers for a fleeting moment. He felt a tremor pass through her, a silent acknowledgement of the change in her fate. He looked into her veiled eyes, and for a brief second he thought he saw a flicker of gratitude, a spark of hope in the depths of her despair. He gestured towards his caravan. "Come," he said gently. "You are safe now." Whispers in the palace Basira was led through the grand gates of Jalil's palace. The sheer size of the structure intimidated her. The high walls, adorned with intricate carvings, seemed to stretch towards the heavens. The courtyard, paved with smooth, cool stone, echoed with the sounds of her own footsteps. It was a world away from the dust and chaos of the marketplace. Servants, their movements swift and silent, guided her through the echoing halls. The palace was opulent, filled with treasures from distant lands, shimmering silks, gleaming jewels, and maps charting trade routes across vast deserts and oceans. Yet, despite its grandeur, a sense of loneliness permeated the air. It was a palace built for a king, but it felt empty, devoid of warmth and laughter. Basira was taken to a bathing chamber, a room of polished marble and fragrant steam. The servants helped her remove her layers of clothing, revealing the thin, worn garments beneath. As they gently washed the dust and grime from her skin, Basira felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. She had been exposed, stripped bare, not just of her clothing, but of her anonymity. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the unfamiliar surroundings, the curious gazes of the servants. Then a gasp echoed through the chamber. One of the servants had noticed the scar that snaked down Basira's back, a pale, winding mark that resembled ancient script. It was the legacy of a lightning strike she had suffered as a child, a mark that had set her apart, made her an object of curiosity and fear. Basira opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She braced herself for the inevitable questions, the whispers, the judgment. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Jalil sat in his private chamber, surrounded by his advisors. They were discussing matters of trade, alliances, and the ever-present threat of drought. But Jalil's thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Basira, the quiet woman he had bought for 2 gold coins. He found himself wondering about her story, the life hidden beneath the veil. His advisors, sensing his distraction, cautioned him. "Sheikh Jalil," one of them said, his voice laced with concern, "it is unwise to become attached to a slave. They are but possessions, tools to serve our needs." Another advisor nodded in agreement. "Remember, Sheikh, your duty is to your people, not to a single slave girl." Jalil listened to their words, but his heart remained troubled. He knew they were right, that he should not allow himself to be swayed by sentiment. Yet he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Basira was more than just a slave, that she held a significance he couldn't yet comprehend. The map of dreams lay forgotten in a dusty chest, tucked away in a corner of Jalil's private chamber. It was a fragile piece of parchment, passed down from his mother, covered in faded ink and strange symbols. It depicted a hidden oasis, a place of legend whispered about in hushed tones by desert nomads. Jalil's mother had believed in its existence, her faith unwavering despite the skepticism of others. She had told him stories of the oasis, a paradise of lush greenery and crystal-clear water hidden amidst the barren sands. She had described the map in detail, the unique pattern of a winding path leading to the oasis's hidden entrance. Jalil, as a boy, had listened to his mother's tales with wide-eyed wonder, his heart filled with a longing for this mythical place. But as he grew older, the demands of leadership and the harsh realities of the desert had hardened him. He had pushed the stories aside, dismissing them as childish fantasies. The map remained locked away, a reminder of a dream he no longer dared to believe in, Then, one evening, a servant came to him, his voice trembling with excitement. "Sheikh Jalil," he stammered, "we have seen something remarkable." He led Jalil to the bathing chamber, where Basira stood, her back exposed, the pale scar winding down her spine. Jalil's breath caught in his throat. The scar, illuminated by the soft lamplight, was an exact replica of the map his mother had described. The winding path, the strange symbols, they were all there, etched onto Basira's skin, as if by some divine hand. A wave of emotion washed over Jalil, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. Grief for his mother, whose dream he had dismissed, mingled with a flicker of hope, a rekindled belief in the possibility of the oasis. Tears welled in his eyes, tears he hadn't shed since his mother's passing. He looked at Basira, no longer seeing a slave but a living map, a key to unlocking a legend. He reached out, his hand hovering over the scar, as if tracing the path to the oasis. Basira, sensing his gaze, turned to face him. She saw the tears in his eyes, the mixture of awe and sorrow on his face. She didn't understand the significance of her scar, the emotions it evoked in him. But she saw the change in him, the softening of his features, the flicker of something akin to wonder in his eyes. From that moment forward, Jalil treated Basira with an unusual kindness, a respect that confused and unsettled her. He provided her with comfortable quarters, fine clothes, and delicious food. He spoke to her in gentle tones, asking about her past, her life before the auction. He seemed genuinely interested in her, a stark contrast to the indifference she had encountered from others. Basira remained guarded, unsure of his motives. She had learned to be wary of kindness, to suspect hidden agendas, but she couldn't deny the change in Jalil, the growing sense that he saw her as more than just a possession. Stolen glances passed between Basira and Jalil in the quiet corners of the palace. Jalil would find himself seeking her out, drawn to her quiet presence. He would often find her in the palace gardens, tending to the fragrant jasmine vines or watching the fountain's sparkling spray. He would stand at a distance observing her, his heart filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and a burgeoning tenderness. He would ask her about her childhood, her family, the life she had lost to the drought. Basira, initially hesitant, began to open up, sharing fragments of her past, her voice soft as the desert wind. She spoke of her village, the green fields that had once flourished, the laughter of children playing in the streets. She spoke of the day the lightning struck, the searing pain, the fear that had gripped her as she lay unconscious beneath the storm-ravaged sky. Jalil listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. He was captivated by her resilience, her quiet strength in the face of adversity. He found himself wanting to know more, to understand the woman hidden beneath the veil of her past. Basira, in turn, found herself drawn to Jalil's quiet intensity. She sensed the conflict within him, the battle between his duty and his growing affection for her. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the genuine concern in his voice. She had never been treated with such respect, such consideration. It was a novel experience, one that both intrigued and frightened her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Jalil found Basira sitting by the fountain. He approached her, his footsteps soft on the stone. "Basira," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. He saw a flicker of apprehension in their depths, but also a hint of curiosity. "Tell me," he continued, "about the scar. Do you remember the lightning strike?" Basira hesitated, her hand instinctively going to her back, tracing the outline of the scar. "I remember the storm," she said softly. "The blinding light, the searing pain. I remember waking up, feeling different, changed. Jalil nodded, his gaze fixed on her face. "Changed how?" he asked gently. Basira looked away, her gaze drifting towards the distant horizon. "I can feel things now," she whispered. "Things others cannot. The moisture in the air, the whispers of water beneath the sand." Jalil's heart quickened. Could it be true? Could the lightning strike have given her more than just a scar, a map to a hidden oasis? Could it have given her the ability to find it, to bring his mother's dream to life? He looked at Basira, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and wonder. The stolen glances they had shared had become something more, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that transcended the boundaries of master and slave. The viper's ear, Hafiz, twitched at the sound of hushed voices. He lurked in the shadows of the marketplace, his keen ears picking up snippets of gossip from passing servants. He had been keeping tabs on Jalil's palace, his greed gnawing at him like a desert rat. He knew he had sold Basira for a pittance, a foolish mistake driven by impatience. Now whispers of a strange scar, a map etched onto the slave girl's back, reached his ears. He strained closer, his heart quickening with each word. A map, a hidden oasis? Could it be true? The servants spoke of Jalil's sudden change in demeanor, his unusual kindness towards the slave girl. They spoke of his whispered consultations with his advisors, the hushed excitement that rippled through the palace. Hafiz pieced together the fragments of information, his mind racing. He realized that the worthless slave girl he had dismissed so readily might be worth a fortune he intended to claim for himself. A malicious grin spread across his face. He knew Jalil's rivals, wealthy merchants who would pay handsomely for the secret to a hidden oasis. A plan began to form in his mind, a plan as venomous as the desert viper. He would kidnap Basira, steal the map from her back, and sell her to the highest bidder. He would turn Jalil's newfound hope into his own personal gain. He slipped away from the marketplace, his mind buzzing with the details of his scheme. He sought out a group of rough-looking men, known for their ruthlessness and their willingness to do his dirty work. He offered them a share of the profits, a promise that gleamed in their eyes like gold in the desert sun. They agreed readily, their hands itching for the chance to snatch the slave girl and deliver her to Jalil's rivals. Hafiz, his viper's ear ever alert, continued to gather information, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He knew he had to act quickly before Jalil discovered the true value of his prize. The desert sands were shifting, and Hafiz the viper was ready to pounce. Divided loyalties tore at Sheikh Jalil. His advisors, their faces etched with concern, urged him to act. "Sheikh Jalil," the eldest advisor said, his voice grave, "you must put aside your sentimentality. This slave girl, this map, is the key to our survival. The oasis she marks could save our people from this devastating drought." The other advisors echoed his words, their voices rising in a chorus of urgency. "Think of the prosperity, Sheikh, the wealth. We could become the most powerful tribe in the desert." Jalil paced the length of his chamber, his heart heavy. He looked at the map his mother had cherished, the map now mirrored on Basira's back. He knew his advisors were right. The oasis, if it truly existed, could change everything. It could bring life back to the parched lands, prosperity to his people. But the thought of using Basira, of reducing her to a mere instrument for his ambition, filled him with unease. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability beneath her quiet strength. He had heard her stories, her whispered memories of a life lost to the drought. He had begun to see her not as a slave, but as a person, a woman worthy of respect and compassion. He struggled to reconcile the legend of the oasis with the reality of Basira, the woman who held the key to its discovery. "But what of her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What of her life, her feelings?" The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. "She is a slave, Sheikh," one of them said, his tone dismissive. Her life is yours to command. Another advisor stepped forward, his voice laced with pragmatism. Think of the greater good, Sheikh. The lives of your people depend on this. Jalil closed his eyes, his head pounding with the weight of his decision. He wanted to believe in the oasis, to fulfill his mother's dream, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was betraying Basira, sacrificing her for the sake of his ambition. He pushed the thought away, telling himself it was for the greater good. He would find the oasis, he would save his people, and then perhaps he would find a way to repay Basira for her unwilling sacrifice. He turned to his advisors, his voice firm. Prepare for a journey, he commanded. We leave for the desert at dawn. He avoided Basira's gaze, afraid to see the fear and resentment he knew he would find there. He pushed her away, both physically and emotionally, trying to distance himself from the growing conflict within his own heart. A desperate plea escaped Basira's lips as she sought out Jalil. She had overheard the hushed conversation between Hafiz's men in the marketplace, their cruel laughter echoing in the twilight air. They spoke of kidnapping her, of stealing the secret etched onto her back. They spoke of delivering her to Jalil's rivals, of the riches they would receive in return. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She knew Hafiz, his cruelty, his greed. She knew he would stop at nothing to profit from her misfortune. She had to warn Jalil, to tell him of the impending danger. She found him in his private chamber, poring over maps and scrolls, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, his expression guarded. Basira, he said, his voice cool, what is it you want? She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the change in him, the distance he had placed between them. She knew he was struggling, torn between his duty and his growing affection for her, but she had no time for hesitation. Hafiz, she blurted out, her voice trembling. He plans to kidnap me. He knows about the scar. Jalil's eyes narrowed. Hafiz, he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. What nonsense is this? Basira stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly together. It is not nonsense, she pleaded. I heard them, his men. They spoke of taking me, of selling me to your rivals. Jalil shook his head, dismissing her words. You are mistaken, he said, his tone dismissive. Hafiz is a petty thief, a nuisance. He poses no threat to me or to you. Basira's eyes filled with tears. You do not believe me, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You think I am lying. Jalil sighed, his patience wearing thin. He had been bombarded with warnings and advice from his advisors, their voices clamoring for him to exploit the secret of her scar. He was weary of the intrigue, the whispers, the constant reminders of the burden he carried. He didn't want to believe Basira, to add another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Enough, he said, his voice sharp. I have more important matters to attend to. He turned away from her, his gaze returning to the maps spread out before him. Basira stood there for a moment, her heart sinking. He hadn't believed her, hadn't even considered the possibility that she might be telling the truth. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, a sense of utter helplessness. She turned and left the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. She was alone, unprotected, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The danger loomed, and Jalil, the man she had hoped would protect her, had turned a deaf ear to her desperate plea. A change of heart stirred within Jalil. He sat alone in his chamber, the maps and scrolls forgotten, Basira's desperate plea echoing in his ears. He had dismissed her words, attributing them to fear, to the heightened anxieties of a slave girl. But now, in the quiet solitude of his chamber, doubts began to creep into his mind. He recalled Basira's demeanor, the sincerity in her eyes, the tremor in her voice. She hadn't seemed like a liar, not like someone seeking attention or trying to manipulate him. He thought of Hafiz, the viper he had underestimated, the man whose greed knew no bounds. He had dismissed him as a petty thief, but perhaps he had been too quick to judge. Perhaps Hafiz was more cunning, more dangerous than he had realized. Jalil rose from his chair, pacing the length of his chamber. He couldn't shake the image of Basira's face, the fear and desperation that had clouded her eyes. He had pushed her away, blinded by his own ambition, his desire to fulfill his mother's dream. He had seen her as a map, a tool to achieve his goals. But what if she was right? What if Hafiz was planning to kidnap her, to steal the secret she carried on her back? He couldn't bear the thought of her falling into Hafiz's clutches, of the harm that could befall her. He had a responsibility to protect her, not just as a valuable possession, but as a human being. He realized that his advisors, in their eagerness for the oasis, had blinded him to the very real danger Basira faced. They had urged him to exploit her, to use her for the benefit of his tribe, but they had not considered her safety, her well-being. He had allowed their voices to drown out his own conscience, his growing respect for Basira. He stopped pacing, a sudden clarity washing over him. He had been wrong, foolishly wrong. He had to trust Basira, to believe in her warning. He had to protect her, not just for the sake of the oasis, but for her own sake. He turned and strode towards the door, his heart pounding with a newfound resolve. He would find Basira, he would apologize for his disbelief, and he would make sure she was safe. He would face Hafiz, and he would protect the woman who, unknowingly, held the key to his mother's dream and perhaps his own redemption. The secret alliance began to take shape in the hushed stillness of the pre-dawn hours. Jalil summoned Omar, his most trusted servant, a man whose loyalty had been forged in the fires of shared hardship and unwavering belief in his mother's legend. Omar, his weathered face etched with concern, listened intently as Jalil recounted Basira's warning and his own change of heart. He spoke of Hafiz's plot, the danger that loomed over them, and his determination to protect Basira and find the oasis. Omar, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of apprehension and excitement, pledged his unwavering support. He had heard the tales of the oasis since he was a boy, stories whispered by Jalil's mother, stories that had fueled his own dreams of a land where water flowed freely and life flourished. He believed in the legend, and he believed in Jalil's ability to bring it to life. Together, they began to make preparations for their secret journey. They gathered supplies, dates and dried meat, water skins and sturdy ropes. They selected the strongest camels from Jalil's caravan, animals capable of enduring the harsh desert conditions. They packed their provisions in silence, their movements swift and efficient, careful not to arouse suspicion among the other servants. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, Jalil sought out Basira. He found her in the palace gardens, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a veil of sadness shrouding her features. He approached her, his heart heavy with regret. "Basira," he said, his voice soft, "I owe you an apology. I should have believed you. I should have trusted your warning." Basira looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. She saw the sincerity in his gaze, the genuine remorse on his face. A flicker of hope ignited within her. "I understand your fear," he continued, "your apprehension, but I assure you I will protect you. We will face this danger together." He told her of his plan, his decision to seek out the oasis, not just for his people, but for her safety. He asked for her help, her knowledge of the desert, her unique ability to sense water. Basira, her initial surprise giving way to a quiet determination, agreed to help. She had learned to trust her instincts, the heightened senses that had been awakened by the lightning strike. She knew the desert, its hidden dangers, and its subtle whispers of life. She knew she could guide Jalil. help him find the oasis that held the promise of salvation for his people and, perhaps, a new beginning for herself. As they finalized their preparations, Basira surprised Jalil with her knowledge of the desert terrain, the hidden trails, and the ancient wells that dotted the landscape. She pointed out the best route to take, the places to avoid, the signs to look for that indicated the presence of water. Jalil listened intently, his admiration for her growing with each passing moment. He realized that she was more than just a map, more than just a key to unlocking his mother's dream. She was a valuable ally, a resourceful companion, a woman whose strength and resilience would be essential to their survival in the harsh and unforgiving desert. Under the cloak of secrecy, the small band prepared to depart, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The desert awaited, its secrets hidden beneath the shifting sands, its fate intertwined with the secret alliance forged between a sheikh, a slave girl, and a loyal servant. The desert journey began under the pale light of the rising sun. Jalil, Basira, and Omar rode in silence, their camels' hooves sinking softly into the cool sand. The vast expanse of the desert stretched before them, an endless sea of dunes rippling under the wind's caress. The air, crisp and clear at first, grew hotter with each passing hour, the sun beating down mercilessly. The landscape, initially varied with rocky outcrops and wind-sculpted formations, gradually transformed into a monotonous expanse of sand, the horizon a shimmering mirage. The days blurred into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, the changing patterns of the sand dunes, and the rhythmic sway of the camel's gait. They rationed their water carefully, each sip a precious commodity in the arid landscape. The dates and dried meat sustained them, but the constant thirst gnawed at their throats, a constant reminder of the desert's harsh embrace. The journey tested their resilience, pushing them to their limits. The relentless sun sapped their strength, the wind whipped sand into their faces, and the vast emptiness of the desert weighed heavily on their spirits. But amidst the hardship, a bond began to form between Jalil and Basira. They shared stories of their past, their voices soft against the backdrop of the desert wind. Jalil spoke of his mother, her unwavering belief in the oasis, the stories she had told him that had fueled his childhood dreams. Basira spoke of her village, the life she had lost, the fear and uncertainty that had haunted her since the day she was driven from her home. They spoke of their hopes and fears, their dreams and regrets, their voices weaving a tapestry of shared experiences against the vast canvas of the desert. Jalil found himself increasingly drawn to Basira's quiet strength, her resilience in the face of adversity. He admired her knowledge of the desert, her ability to read the subtle signs of the landscape, the whispers of water hidden beneath the sand. Basira, in turn, found herself drawn to Jalil's quiet intensity, the kindness he showed her, the respect he demonstrated despite their differing circumstances. She sensed the burden he carried, the weight of responsibility for his people, and she admired his determination to find the oasis, to bring life back to the parched lands. One evening, as they huddled around a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across the sand, Jalil looked at Basira, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "for your guidance, your strength, your belief in this journey." Basira met his gaze, a faint smile touching her lips. "We are in this together, Jalil," she said softly. "We will find the oasis together." The desert journey, though arduous and challenging, had become a shared pilgrimage, a journey of discovery not just of a hidden oasis, but of a connection forged in the heart of the desert, a bond as strong and enduring as the sands themselves. Whispers of water danced on the desert wind, carried on the faintest of breezes. Basira, her senses heightened by the long-ago lightning strike, tilted her head, listening intently. She closed her eyes, her breath coming in slow, measured gasps. The world around her faded, replaced by a subtle awareness of the air's moisture, the faintest hint of coolness beneath the scorching sun. She had felt it for days, a growing certainty that water lay hidden beneath the sand, a secret whispered on the wind. She opened her eyes, her gaze sweeping across the seemingly endless expanse of dunes. "There," she said, her voice barely a whisper, pointing towards a distant ridge. "I feel it there. Water." Jalil and Omar exchanged glances, a mixture of hope and skepticism in their eyes. They had been following Basira's guidance for days, trusting her uncanny ability to sense the presence of water. She had led them to several small, hidden wells, providing them with much-needed replenishment for their dwindling supplies. But this time felt different. The certainty in Basira's voice, the intensity in her gaze, suggested something more significant, something more profound. They urged their camels forward, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they approached the ridge, Basira's senses grew stronger. She could feel the water now, not just a faint whisper, but a steady pulse beneath the surface. She dismounted her camel, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. She closed her eyes again, her hands outstretched, as if drawing the water towards her. "Here," she said, her voice stronger now, more confident. "Dig here." Jalil and Omar quickly dismounted, their hands trembling with excitement. They began to dig, their shovels sinking into the sand, the dry grains giving way to damp earth. The air grew cooler, the scent of moisture filling their nostrils. Deeper and deeper they dug, their efforts fueled by a growing sense of anticipation. Then, with a sudden rush, the sand gave way, revealing a small pool of crystal-clear water, shimmering like a jewel in the desert sun. A gasp of awe escaped Jalil's lips. He looked at Basira, his eyes filled with wonder and gratitude. "You did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You found it." Basira smiled, a quiet sense of satisfaction filling her heart. She had not just found water, she had found a connection to the desert, a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped its hidden life. The whispers of water had led them to this oasis, a haven of life in the heart of the barren sands. Oasis found. It was a sight that stole the breath from their lungs. Nestled amidst the towering dunes, hidden from the world by a curtain of wind-sculpted rock, lay a verdant paradise. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, their fronds rustling like whispers of welcome. A crystal-clear stream gurgled over smooth stones, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. Lush green vegetation carpeted the ground, a vibrant contrast to the barren sands that surrounded them. Birdsong filled the air, a melody of life echoing through the tranquil oasis. Jalil, Basira, and Omar stood in stunned silence, their eyes drinking in the beauty of the hidden haven. They had journeyed for days through the harsh, unforgiving desert, their bodies weary, their spirits tested. Now they had found their reward, a sanctuary of life amidst the desolation. Jalil knelt by the stream, cupping his hands to drink the cool, sweet water. He splashed the water onto his face, washing away the dust and grime of the journey. He looked up at Basira, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You have brought us to paradise," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Basira smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had not just found water, she had found a place of hope, a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. Omar, his weathered face beaming, busied himself unpacking the camels, setting up camp in the shade of the palm trees. He hummed a cheerful tune, his voice echoing through the tranquil oasis. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to revel in their discovery, to forget the dangers that lurked beyond the oasis's protective embrace. They ate their meager rations with renewed appetite, the sweet water quenching their thirst, the cool shade offering respite from the desert sun. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a sense of peace settled over the oasis. Jalil and Basira sat by the stream, their feet dangling in the cool water. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices blending with the gentle murmur of the stream. Jalil told Basira of his mother's stories, the legends of the oasis that had sustained his hope through the long years of drought. Basira, in turn, spoke of her own dreams, her hopes for a future free from fear and uncertainty. They shared a moment of quiet intimacy, a connection forged in the heart of the desert, a bond as strong and enduring as the oasis itself. Then, a sudden sound shattered the tranquility. The cracking of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the muffled sound of approaching footsteps. Jalil and Basira exchanged a look of alarm. They knew that sound. They had heard it before, in the marketplace, in the hushed whispers of Hafiz's men. They rose to their feet, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they turned towards the sound, a group of rough-looking men emerged from the shadows of the palm trees. Hafiz, his face contorted in a malicious grin, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Well, well, well," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Looks like I've found you after all." The oasis, their sanctuary of peace, had become a trap. The fight for survival was about to begin. The shifting sands erupted in chaos. Hafiz's thugs, their faces hidden by scarves, lunged forward, their swords glinting in the fading light. Jalil, his own sword drawn, met their attack with a fierce determination. He fought with the skill honed from years of leading caravans through dangerous territories, his movements swift and precise. Omar, armed with a sturdy staff, joined the fray, his loyalty to Jalil fueling his every blow. Basira, unarmed, sought refuge behind a cluster of palm trees. She watched the fight unfold, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't fight, not with weapons, but she could use her knowledge of the desert, her heightened senses, to help Jalil and Omar. As the fight raged, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The oasis, a haven of life, was also a place of hidden dangers. Sinkholes, concealed beneath the surface, lay in wait for the unwary. Basira, her senses attuned to the subtle movements of the earth, saw a section of ground begin to tremble, the sand rippling as if something stirred beneath. She cried out, her voice barely audible above the clash of steel. "Jalil, the ground, behind you!" Jalil, locked in combat with two of Hafiz's thugs, heard her warning. He spun around. Just as the ground beneath his feet gave way, he stumbled back, narrowly avoiding the gaping maw of a sinkhole that opened up before him. Hafiz, seeing his opportunity, lunged forward, his sword aimed at Jalil's exposed back. But Basira, quick as a desert viper, grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at Hafiz. The rock struck him squarely in the chest, knocking him off balance. He stumbled backwards, his eyes widening in surprise, and fell headlong into the sinkhole. His cries echoed briefly, then were swallowed by the shifting sands. The remaining thugs, seeing their leader's demise, lost their nerve. They turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the dunes. The fight was over. Silence descended upon the oasis, broken only by the gentle murmur of the stream. Jalil, his breath coming in ragged gasps, looked at Basira, his eyes filled with gratitude and a newfound respect. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse. Basira, her own heart still racing, met his gaze. "We saved each other," she replied softly. Omar, his face pale, approached them, his staff still clutched tightly in his hand. "The viper is gone," he said, his voice trembling. "The oasis is safe." Jalil nodded, his gaze sweeping across the tranquil haven. The shifting sands had claimed Hafiz, but they had also revealed the true value of the 2 gold coins bargain. He had bought Basira as a slave, but she had become his savior, his protector, his guide. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a growing tenderness. He realized that the oasis was not just a source of water, it was a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected gifts that fate could bestow. A gift of life flowed from the hidden oasis, a blessing spreading across the parched lands. Jalil, guided by Basira's innate sense of the desert's hidden pathways, led his people back to their village, their hearts filled with a hope they hadn't felt in years. News of the oasis spread like wildfire, carried on the wind to neighboring tribes, whispers of a place where water flowed freely, where life flourished amidst the desolation. Jalil, now hailed as a visionary leader, shared the oasis's bounty with all who sought its life-giving waters. He organized the construction of channels and aqueducts, directing the flow of water to the parched fields, bringing life back to the barren lands. The withered crops revived, their leaves unfurling towards the sun, their roots drinking deeply from the newly found source. The animals, weakened by thirst, flocked to the water's edge, their bodies rejuvenated, their spirits renewed. The faces of Jalil's people, once etched with despair, now shone with gratitude and hope. Children laughed and played in the newly irrigated fields, their voices echoing through the once silent village. The elders, their wisdom deepened by years of hardship, blessed Jalil's name, their hearts filled with a profound sense of relief. Jalil, his own heart overflowing with joy, watched his people thrive, their lives transformed by the gift of water. He knew he owed it all to Basira, the woman he had bought for 2 gold coins, the woman who had guided him to the oasis, who had saved his life, and who had shown him the true meaning of leadership. In a grand ceremony held in the heart of the village, Jalil publicly declared Basira a free woman. He spoke of her courage, her resilience, her unwavering belief in the oasis. He acknowledged her contribution, not just to his own life, but to the lives of all his people. He presented her with a beautiful robe, woven with threads of gold and silver, a symbol of her newfound freedom and her invaluable contribution to their survival. Basira, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude, accepted his gift, her heart filled with a sense of belonging she had never known before. She looked at Jalil, and in his eyes she saw not just respect and admiration, but something more, something deeper, a connection that transcended the boundaries of master and slave, a bond forged in the heart of the desert. The oasis, a gift of life, had brought not just water to the parched lands, but also love to 2 hearts bound together by fate's strange and wondrous design. 2 gold coins, 1 destiny. Jalil stood before Basira, his heart pounding in his chest. The oasis flowed, his people thrived, and a new era of prosperity had dawned. But amidst all the celebrations, his thoughts kept returning to Basira, the woman who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. He found her in the palace gardens, tending to the fragrant jasmine vines, her fingers gently caressing the delicate blossoms. He approached her, his footsteps soft on the stone path. "Basira," he said, his voice a low murmur, "I need to speak with you." She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his, a quiet question in their depths. He took a deep breath, his heart overflowing with emotions he could no longer contain. "I bought you for 2 gold coins," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 2 gold coins that changed my destiny, that brought me more than all the riches in the world." He reached into his pouch and withdrew the 2 gold coins, the ones he had given to Hafiz, the ones that had sealed their fate. He held them out to her, his hand trembling slightly. "These coins," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "they represent a bargain, a transaction. But they also represent something far more precious, something I never expected to find." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "Basira," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness he had never allowed himself to express. "I love you." Basira's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She had sensed his growing affection, the change in his demeanor, the respect and admiration that had blossomed between them. But she hadn't dared to hope for this, for a love that transcended the boundaries of their circumstances. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of joy and relief, of a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of places. "Jalil," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you too." He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "Will you stay with me, Basira?" he asked, his voice filled with a longing that echoed the whispers of the desert wind. "Not as a slave, but as my wife, my equal, my partner in this new life we have found together?" Basira nodded, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. She placed her hand over his, her fingers intertwining with his. "Yes, Jalil," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I will stay." They embraced, their bodies pressed close, their hearts beating as one. The 2 gold coins, once a symbol of a transaction, now represented a shared destiny, a love story as unique and precious as the oasis itself. They were married in a grand ceremony, celebrated by all the tribes who had benefited from the oasis's life-giving waters. The 2 gold coins were displayed prominently, a reminder of the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Jalil and Basira ruled wisely and justly, their love a beacon of hope for their people. They shared the oasis's bounty, ensuring that all who sought its waters found sustenance and solace. They honored the legend of the oasis, the dream that had brought them together, and they lived their lives guided by the principles of compassion, generosity, and unwavering belief in the power of love to transform even the most barren of landscapes.